Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I want to start talking about a new, kind of a new series, right? And this series, what I want to talk about is the elements of Dungeons and Dragons that make it so fundamentally different than any OSR or indie. By the way, I am calling it now. I believe that the year 2024 is two things. It is the celebration of 50 years of Dungeons and Dragons, but it is also the crisis year for OSR and indie tabletop role-playing games. So the OSR and indie community have always really struggled to compete with Dungeons and Dragons. Not a single game has ever been able to unseat Dungeons and Dragons for the number one slot. There were some rumors that Pathfinder did it for about 2 or 3 months, but there were some articles that came along and said no, those numbers are really off. Even Pathfinder never budged D&D out of the number one slot. D&D is number one tabletop role-playing game in America. It has never been unseated, in my humble opinion. You could debate on if Pathfinder unseated for 2 months. That's worth a debate, but there isn't strong evidence from what I've found, and according to a bunch of articles. All right, and then so basically, let's get into so OSR and indie really struggle. Why do they struggle? So I'm convinced the reason they struggle is they're not able to realize they lose the fight because they don't know where the arena is, right? None of these OSR and indie games ever really go into competition with Dungeons & Dragons because they don't know what competition with Dungeons & Dragons is. So what I want to start doing today is I want to look at when a player, okay, all right, so a Dungeons & Dragons player, I use the term Dragon Master, okay? I think it's unfair to say, oh, the person who creates the world is a dungeon master, but you made a player character, so you're a player, right? I think that's unfair. So I think the correct term is Dragon Master. So when I say Dragon Master, I mean Dungeons and Dragons player. That's what everybody else says, but I say Dragon Master. All right, let's keep moving. When a Dragon Master sits down at the table, what are they experiencing? And this is what I'm saying. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to meet you where you guys are at. You guys all talk about Dungeons and Dragons as a game. I'm nano celebrity famous, not for saying D&D is not a game. I think that's one of the reasons why people come to my channel, and because I have this unique view of Dungeons and Dragons. I don't believe Dungeons and Dragons is a game. I never did. But I'm going to meet you where you're at. You think it's a game, right? But I want you to experience this, right? If Dungeons and Dragons is a game, and that is certainly the term that people put in front of it. I think it's a facade, like it's just a fake front, right, for Dungeons and Dragons, in my humble opinion. I don't think it ever was a game. I don't think it isn't a game now, and it never will be a game. But I'm going to meet you where you're at. Let's consider that. Let's talk about the game, air quotes, aspect of Dungeons and Dragons. When does somebody encounter that? And what I'm telling you is this is why the OSR and the indies are in a year of crisis. And where there's really a big question on if anybody should ever make another OSR indie game, because you're throwing money in a hole. Like, it's because it's almost impossible for them to compete now, right? All the games that are really popping are like literally D&D adjacent, are D&D or D&G adjacent. Like D&D's own competitors are literally just people that D&D has already made millionaires. Matt Colville, Matthew Mercer, blah blah blah. Okay, all right, let's keep moving here. Brendan Mulligan. All right, Brendan Lee Mulligan, excuse me. All right, let's keep moving. So where do people actually see the game? And what I'm saying is you don't even see this facade of Dungeons and Dragons as a game until layers and layers and layers and layers and layers deep, right? And I want to talk about the elements you encounter before you encounter Dungeons and Dragons as a game. All right, so layer one, element one, right? When you sit down as a Dragon Master, what are you encountering with Dungeons and Dragons, right? That you do not encounter on any tabletop role-playing game in the world, not with any OSR, not with any indie TTRPG. And the first thing is history, right? 5 decades. Now, there's quite a, Traveler's like 40 years old, I think, right? So, doesn't it have its own legacy? But here's the kicker. No. When I say history, I mean history, right? Like, Dungeons and Dragons dropped on February 7th, 1974, day one of Dungeons and Dragons. Gary Gygax delivers Dungeons and Dragons to the world. And by 1984, right, Dungeons and Dragons already has a movie made about it, which is Tom Hanks's movie. I'm forgetting the name right now. But it's also been in the news for like 6 years, and there's a group called MAD, Mothers Against Dungeons and Dragons. Within 10 years, Dungeons and Dragons is famous, right? And the first real epic part of its history is the Satanic Panic, right? Now, what's weird is you would think that the Satanic Panic was bad. It's not. It was like it was bad for the people who experienced it. For Dungeons and Dragons, it could not have been better. And what's really wild is now today people talk about like people love the time when they were persecuted, right? And that's the issue, right? Like nobody's going to persecute you for playing OSE. No one's going to persecute you for playing Masks because nobody cares, right? Like nobody cares. There's no, Mothers Against Mask. There's no Mothers Against Bluebeard, right? Like people literally don't care you're playing, right? Like people could not care more that people were playing Dungeons and Dragons from the first decade. Like people like D&D was famous for people who loved it, and it was famous for people who hated it, right? When I say history, I mean history, right? And Dungeons and Dragons truly made history. It made history in so many ways. And it was not just the Satanic Panic. The Satanic Panic was there. Also, Saturday morning cartoon, right? Dungeons and Dragons had a Saturday morning cartoon, which means that people who care about American television and American Saturday morning cartoons, that show comes up, right? People who don't care about Dungeons and Dragons care about Dungeons and Dragons because it has infiltrated so many things, right? Saturday morning cartoons in the 80s. It was such a huge deal. Like it was part of people's lives for like 10, 15 years, right? Meaningless now, right? Because you could watch anything you want 24 hours a day. But at that time, new shows, new seasons, right? Like it was a big deal. Sibling bonding, like it was a huge deal. It was a way of life. And Gary did it. He went to Hollywood. He failed to get a movie deal, but he brought back a Saturday morning cartoon, right? Like Dungeons & Dragons' failure is more than the OSR and Indie can even accomplish today, right? And so when a dungeon master, when a dragon master are sitting down, right, to the table, there are layers and 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 layers that are encountered before you ever get to thinking of it as a game. And the first layer is history. And when you sit down at the table, you know there is a rich, storied, vibrant, powerful history. Powerful that no OSR game and no indie game has, right? The reality is people all over the planet know what Dungeons and Dragons is. You could go to every continent and you would struggle to find anyone who could tell you what TTRPG even stands for, right? So the reality is one of the reasons why the OSR and indie are in so much trouble, right, is because fundamentally they don't have history, and they don't have a whole host of other layers that I'm going to talk to you about going forward. But I thank you for letting me share and explain to you why Dungeons & Dragons history is so critical, right? Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion, nothing more and nothing less. What's important is when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.